The 15th of March, 1939, Prague. In a cold spring snow, German motorized columns roll into the Czechoslovak capital. There has been no battle and no defense of the city. Barely 6 months after the Munich Agreement stripped Czechoslovakia of its border fortifications and handed the Sudetenland to the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler has ordered the Wehrmacht, the German army, to occupy the remains of the Czech lands. By nightfall, Hitler himself sleeps in Prague Castle, above the city of the Bohemian kings, and the following day he proclaims from its halls the creation of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. The independent Czechoslovak state, born 2 decades earlier, ceases to exist. Among those who watch the German columns pass in silence is also a decorated army colonel and celebrated military writer, a man who only months before had begged his president face to face to fight the Germans rather than surrender to them. Within 3 years, he will wear a uniform of his own design, broadcast in support of the Nazi occupier every week, and become the most hated Czech of the war, the living symbol of collaboration, whom his own nation will remember as the Czech Quisling. His name is Emanuel Moravec. Emanuel Moravec was born on the 17th of April, 1893 in Prague, then part of Austro-Hungary, into a modest merchant family. He graduated from an industrial school and took work as a clerk in a Prague company, an unremarkable start for a man who had spent his life in uniform and as a writer. When the First World War broke out in the summer of 1914, Moravec was conscripted into the Austro-Hungarian army and sent to the front. In 1915, he was captured by the Russians and held in a prisoner of war camp in the city of Samarkand, today's Uzbekistan. He volunteered there to fight against the Austro-Hungarian Empire and took command of a machine gun platoon in the 1st Serbian Volunteer Division, a unit raised from Slav prisoners of war to fight on the Russian side. In September 1916, Moravec saw fierce action against Bulgarian forces on the Dobruja front, where he was injured and later was hospitalized. After his recovery, he joined the Czechoslovak Legion, the volunteer force of the Czechs and Slovaks, fighting for the Allies for the idea of an independent homeland for the formation of the new state, Czechoslovakia. In this time, Moravec was desperate to secure an officer's commission, so he falsely claimed to hold an engineering degree. Emanuel Moravec, together with other Czechoslovak legionnaires in Russia, were influenced by the evolving Russian Civil War, and their return to the newly founded Czechoslovakia took years. During this time, in January 1920, Moravec married Helena Grigorievna Biekova, a Russian woman who was 17 years old and expecting his child. Similar relationships with much younger women would become a recurring pattern throughout his life. Upon his return to the newly formed Czechoslovak state, Moravec remained a professional soldier in the Czechoslovak army. He served as an intelligence officer on the staff of the Land Military Command in Uzhhorod, today a city in western Ukraine, then part of Czechoslovakia. Later, he enrolled as a cadet at the War College in Prague, and, even before graduating, was promoted to the rank of major in 1923. From 1923 to 1927, Emanuel Moravec served on the staff of the Land Military Command in Prague. In 1926, an in-depth audit of Moravec's department uncovered financial irregularities, and in 1927, Moravec was transferred and became commander of the 1st Field Battalion of the 24th Infantry Regiment in the city of Znojmo. It was there that his marriage began to fall apart. Moravec was transferred to the town of Michalovce in Slovakia. where he met Ilona Emma Pavla Sondiova, who was 21 years younger than him. In 1932, he divorced his first wife, and that same year, the 39-year-old Moravec married the 18-year-old Ilona Sondiova. At that time, Emanuel Moravec taught at the War College in Prague as he built, alongside his military career, his second reputation as a writer. Under the pen name Stanislav Yester, he contributed articles on political and military affairs to newspapers and magazines. By the early 1930s, he was one of the country's most prominent military thinkers, and he became colonel on the general staff. Moravec's central theme in his writing was the German danger for the Czechoslovak Republic. He warned repeatedly of the expansionist ambitions of Nazi Germany, argued that Czechoslovakia must arm itself and seek alliances with Poland and Italy, and described the Bohemian lands as a natural fortress guarding the head of the Danube basin, a barrier whose fall would open Central Europe to whoever seized it. His arguments and his patriotism caught the attention of President Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, the founder of the Czechoslovak state, and Moravec repeatedly showed loyalty to the president and to the democracy. When Masaryk died in 1937, Moravec led the military procession through Prague and stood guard of honor at his coffin. The decisive test for him came in September 1938. As Hitler pressed his demands for the Sudetenland, the borderland of Czechoslovakia, and the threat of war hung over Europe, Moravec sought an audience with Masaryk's successor, President Edvard Beneš. In a confrontation that lasted some 2 hours, on the eve of the Munich Agreement, he pleaded with the president to reject the ultimatum and lead the country into war rather than capitulate. The Czechoslovak army had mobilized and stood ready behind its border fortifications, but Edvard Beneš chose to accept the Munich terms. Moravec's pleas went unheeded, and the capitulation broke something in him. He raged that men without courage had led the nation to surrender, and declared, a state unwilling to defend its ideals should not boast of them in the same way a prostitute has no right to boast of her honor. In a gesture of contempt for the government, he asked to be released from the army so that he may enlist in the forces of El Salvador, the Central American country. Under the short-lived Second Czechoslovak Republic, as Prague sought to appease Berlin, Moravec was removed from his teaching post at the military academy and forbidden to write for the newspapers, on the grounds that his anti-German polemics were too provocative. Then came the 15th of March 1939 and the German occupation of the remnants of the Czechoslovak Republic. Moravec had every reason to fear the new Nazi rulers, for his name was known across the Reich as that of an enemy of Germany. He was surprised, therefore, when the new German authorities informed him he could resume writing books and newspaper columns. Moravec returned to writing, adopting an editorial line blaming Beneš and the intelligentsia for Czechoslovakia's defeat. He declared it was the unwillingness of the elite to confront Germany militarily that demonstrated democracy's moral decay. One of the most vocal supporters of the idea of defending Czechoslovakia became a collaborator with the Nazis. Moravec was on the radio every week, lending his gifts as a writer and speaker to the occupiers' propaganda. His moment came with the arrival of Reinhard Heydrich as acting Reich Protector of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia in the autumn of 1941. Heydrich wanted harsher control and more visible Czech commitment to the war effort, and Moravec fitted his plans perfectly. In January 1942, over the objections of Emil Hacha, the German-dominated president of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, Heydrich compelled Moravec's appointment as Minister of Education and National Enlightenment, granting him a pardon for his pre-Munich attacks on Germany and setting his zeal to work. In May 1942, he helped establish Curatorium for the Education of Youth, a fascist organization intended to draw young Czechs into the orbit of the Reich, and became its chairman. As minister, Moravec presided over an education system already gutted by the occupation, as the Czech universities had been closed already in 1939. He declared that the Czech universities had no need to reopen, made German a compulsory subject in schools, and preached that Czech culture was properly a branch of the Germanic world. Moravec had a personal ministerial uniform made, a hybrid of Czech army and SS design, which he wore with evident pride. Few figures in the Protectorate were hated by their own people as deeply as Moravec. As early as the winter of 1939 to 1940, the resistance was thinking about killing Moravec, and even the Czechoslovak government in exile in London planned his assassination. When Reinhard Heydrich was mortally wounded by Czechoslovak agents in May 1942, and the Nazi regime answered with terror against the civilian population, killing thousands of people, it was Moravec who stood at the great staged rallies, denouncing the assassins and the exiled Beneš, and calling on Czechs to prove their loyalty to the Reich. In 1943, he even proposed sending the Czech government army to the Eastern Front to fight for Germany, a scheme that Hacha and even Minister of State for Bohemia and Moravia, Karl Hermann Frank, declined to put before Hitler. Moravec also embraced an anti-Semitism that echoed the Nazi Party line, blaming Jewish interests for the pre-war hostility between Czechs and Germans. Moravec's private life was as turbulent as his politics. He married 3 times. With his first wife, he had 2 sons, Igor and Yuri. A second marriage produced a third son, Pavel. And in 1942, the 49-year-old Emanuel Moravec married a former housemaid, Yolana Emerova, who had been 16 years old when their relationship began. His sons were drawn into the wreckage of his choices. Igor volunteered for the Waffen-SS, the military branch of the Nazi paramilitary organization, and fought on the Eastern Front with the Totenkopf division, and in 1947 was hanged in Prague after the war for treason. Yuri served in the German army but was privately critical of his father. The youngest, Pavel, was killed in an air raid in 1944. By the spring of 1945, the war was visibly lost. As the Red Army approached, Moravec turned his propaganda to warnings of the Bolshevik danger, hoping to rally Czechs against the coming Soviet forces. However, his appeals fell flat. When the Prague uprising broke out on the 5th of May, 1945, the 52-year-old Moravec got into a police truck in front of the Collaborator palace, where his ministry was based, and drove off to a meeting with Karl Hermann Frank. However, on its way, the German vehicles came under fire from the insurgents, so the convoy set off for Prague Castle via a different route. The car in which Moravec was sitting ran out of gas while traveling along, so the driver got out. At that moment, Moravec made a final decision. Rather than be captured by the countrymen he had betrayed, he drew a pistol and shot himself. Emanuel Moravec was not the only man broken by the Munich Agreement. Thousands of others who felt the same humiliation chose a different path. They joined the resistance, went into exile, fought the Nazis, or died for the country that had been abandoned in 1938. Moravec made another choice. The officer who had once demanded that Czechoslovakia fight became a servant of the occupier, a minister supporting Nazi propaganda, and a voice urging his own people to accept submission. His story is therefore not simply one of disappointment or bitterness. It is the story of a betrayal, a story of a man who, when others turned their anger into resistance, turned his into collaboration.
Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.